The girl went into the forest and straight up to the little house. The three little men peeped out again. But she did not greet them. And without looking round at them and without speaking to them, she went awkwardly into the room, seated herself by the stove, and began to eat her bread and butter and cake. "Give us some of it," cried the little men. But she replied, "There is not enough for myself. So how can I give it away to other people?" When she had finished eating, they said, "There is a broom for you. Sweep it all clean in front of the back door. Sweep for yourselves." She answered, "I am not your servant." When she saw that they were not going to give her anything, she went out by the door. Then the little men said to each other, "What shall we give her, as she is so naughty, and has a wicked, envious heart, that will never let her do a good turn to anyone?" The first said, "I grant that she may grow uglier every day." The second said, "I grant that at every word she says, a toad shall spring out of her mouth." The third said, "I grant that she may die a miserable death." The maiden looked for strawberries outside, but as she found none, she went angrily home. And when she opened her mouth, and was about to tell her mother what had happened to her in the wood, with every word she said, a toad sprang out of her mouth, so that everyone was seized with horror of her. Then the stepmother was still more enraged, and thought of nothing but how to do every possible injury to the man's daughter, whose beauty, however, grew daily greater. At length she took a cauldron, set it on the fire, and boiled yarn in it. When it was boiled, she flung it on the poor girl's shoulder, and gave her an axe in order that she might go on the frozen river, cut a hole in the ice, and rinse the yarn. She was obedient, went thither and cut a hole in the ice. And while she was in the midst of her cutting, a splendid carriage came driving up, in which sat the king. The carriage stopped, and the king asked, "My child, who are you, and what are you doing here?" "I am a poor girl, and I am rinsing yarn." Then the king felt compassion, and when he saw that she was so very beautiful, he said to her, "Will you go away with me?" "Ah, yes, with all my heart," she answered, for she was glad to get away from the mother and sister. So she got into the carriage and drove away with the king. And when they arrived at his palace, the wedding was celebrated with great pomp, as the little men had granted to the maiden. When a year was over, the young queen bore a son. And as the stepmother had heard of her great good fortune, she came with her daughter to the palace and pretended that she wanted to pay her a visit. But, when the king had gone out, and no one else was present, the wicked woman seized the queen by the head, and her daughter seized her by the feet, and they lifted her out of the bed, and threw her out of the window into the stream which flowed by. Then the ugly daughter laid herself in the bed, and the old woman covered her up over her head. When the king came home again and wanted to speak to his wife, the old woman cried, "Hush, hush, that can't be now. She is lying in a violent sweat. You must let her rest today." The king suspected no evil, and did not come back again till next morning. And as he talked with his wife and she answered him, with every word a toad leaped out, whereas formerly a piece of gold had fallen. Then he asked what that could be. But the old woman said that she had got that from the violent sweat, and would soon lose it again. During the night, however, the scullion saw a duck come swimming up the gutter. And it said, "King, what art thou doing now? Sleepest thou, or wakest thou?" And as he returned no answer, it said, "And my guests, what may they do?" The scullion said, "They are sleeping soundly, too." Then it asked again, "What does little baby mine?" He answered, "Sleepeth in her cradle fine." Then she went upstairs in the form of the queen, nursed the baby, shook up its little bed, covered it over, and then swam away again down the gutter in the shape of a duck. She came thus for 2 nights. On the third, she said to the scullion, "Go and tell the king to take his sword and swing it 3 times over me on the threshold." Then the scullion ran and told this to the king, who came with his sword and swung it thrice over the spirit. And at the 3rd time, his wife stood before him strong, living, and healthy as she had been before. Thereupon the king was full of great joy. But he kept the queen hidden in a chamber until the Sunday, when the baby was to be christened. And when it was christened, he said, "What does a person deserve who drags another out of bed and throws him in the water? The wretch deserves nothing better," answered the old woman, "than to be taken and put in a barrel stuck full of nails, and rolled downhill into the water." Then said the king, "You have pronounced your own sentence." And he ordered such a barrel to be brought, and the old woman to be put into it with her daughter. And then the top was hammered on, and the barrel rolled downhill until it went into the river.